some of the legislative updates. And so I'm Michelle Bethke-Callagher. I'm Director of Student Support Services in Alexandria. We'll have Nicole Woodworth and Heidi here today, and I don't see Heidi, so I'm gonna Nicole.
Yeah, Jamie and Heidi should be hopping on, but
Okay,
I'll just keep the microphone if necessary.
perfect. So I will turn it over to them, and you guys can go ahead and get started.
Awesome. And then Melissa is going to also be joining us for a little bit of an update. Can everyone see my screen okay? Perfect. Well, welcome. Wanted to just bring forward some legislative changes. Some of the most impactful. There's a lot of legislative change that occurred this last session, but we wanted to highlight some of the big key changes and implications for practice for us as special ed leaders. Today is a lot of information, so I'm just disclaimer. It's a lot of content. As we go, please feel free to ask questions or, make requests for additional information. We are coming back together on August 8th to further unpack some of these changes, to network with each other around some of the strategies that people have come up with to really implement these changes. So just know there'll be more time for that networking and collaboration coming up on the 8th. But today we wanted to just give these important highlights. So before the legislative updates specifically, we wanted to provide just a couple of critical updates. And we'll be putting Melissa, do you want to put the link to the slides in the chat just so people have access?
Yeah.
But as you may or may not have known, not sure how many people completely signed off their email over this summer break, but there's been a lot of movement in terms of the OSEP memo around teacher qualifications, specifically tier 1 teachers, and Minnesota being out of compliance with federal IDEA requirements for teacher qualifications. So the specific issue that had been identified was tier 1 teachers assuming the roles of a special ed teacher for longer than 3 years. So that's really the kind of central issue here. And as part of that finding from OSEP, they ordered MDE to submit a corrective action plan, which MDE did on July 16th. And that memo is now a public document. So if you want to read more, each of these images is a link. It's a live link. So you should be able to click on it and access the original memo, the letter to MDE, and then MDE's corrective action plan that they submitted that's pending approval. So wanted you to know that that's out there. And the key highlights here that I mentioned is that 3-year cap, and that after 3 years, that tier 1 teacher needs to move to either a tier 2 by enrolling in a program or discontinue assuming the functions of a special ed teacher. LEAs have time this year to kind of work with those impacted employees, and MDE is supposed to be rolling out more information about this, which they've said they'll do at an upcoming forum. According to the letter, it seems like this is a fairly small number of teachers across the state. I think 17 were cited in the letter, but we'll learn more from MDE. Wanted to make sure that everybody had that critical information. Anything I'm missing, Melissa, or anything to add?
Nicole, I would just add that it sounds like we don't know if the cap has been approved yet by the federal government. So that's still yet to be determined.
Yep, pending approval for sure. Thanks, Jamie. Welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm going to briefly hand it over to Melissa because we also wanted to provide an update on the Special Ed Legislative Summit that just happened.
Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm just going to take a few minutes, and I think I saw Sherry pop on here too, or Melissa. I haven't seen her face, but if either Sherry or Melissa want to add anything, please just jump in. We had the opportunity to attend the Special Education Legislative Summit in July, and that takes place in Washington, D.C. each year. MASE sends a small delegation of leaders on the board to attend cells each year, and it's just really a great opportunity for us to both learn from the experience and bring back things to Minnesota, and also to represent Minnesota legislatively at the national level. So what is CELS? If you're not familiar with it, just a quick intro, is basically an annual opportunity that's sponsored by CASE and CEC to bring advocates from across the country to go ahead and meet with their members of Congress. And also it's an opportunity for us to learn about the process and how we can work with our members of Congress to do that. So it's just a really fun opportunity to pull people together across the state. This year we had about 290 participants from 46 states. So you can go to the next slide, Nicole. So this was just a couple pictures from some of the people from our group this year from Minnesota. So you can see the people that were in the pictures, as well as the names listed here. So we have some representatives from MASE, as well as some other organizations like CEC and just some business partners in Minnesota as well. So talk a little bit more about how that could be you if you want in future years. But CELS just basically includes a lot of information to learn how to ask questions and how to advocate with your members of Congress. And then really a lot of in-depth learning about the key issues that we want to be discussing that are important to, us at the national level across the country, not just the Minnesota issues. And then they provide us with just a lot of tips and good information about how to really get our message to be heard when we do have those meetings. So lots of information that was shared with us to prep us for the meetings that we had and just help us feel good about what we can do to maximize our efforts while we're there. We did have the opportunity to hear from a keynote speaker. She is the Assistant Secretary for the U.S. Department of Education, Office of Special Ed and Rehabilitation Services. So Glenna Wright Gallo spoke to us, and I believe she will also be a keynote at the upcoming CASE conference in November, if any of you are planning to attend in Pittsburgh. She was really, I think, inspirational speaker and really came at things from a message of positivity, which was, I think, a refreshing change to hear from the department in that tone. So excited to have her here. Her history or background is also as a special education leader. So just feel really optimistic about her leadership in the area. You can keep going, Nicole. So the three main issues that we discussed with our members of Congress were around mental health, educator shortages, and then appropriations. And those topics really have not changed in the past few years. I think we continue to see those really rise to the top of the areas of our priorities that we want to touch on. When we met with the members of Congress, we gave them informational handouts and a little folder, and we included a bobber, as you see pictured, just for fun, so that they could kind of have something to tie back to. And Erin Toninato, our executive director, made a really nice intro sort of connection to how we're just sort of bobbing along in special ed, and connected it to how we're really hoping to get support to deal with the ripples of mental health educator shortages and appropriations. One of the main things we also talked about was support, asking members of Congress or thanking them for their support of the IDEA Full Funding Act, which was just reintroduced in July again for the 118th Congress. And I did link things here in the slideshow so you can kind of take a look at some of the documents we had. So there were some nice informational sheets on each of those topics that are linked, as well as the IDEA Full Funding Act. And then if you look in the last bullet there, there are two separate links. So the one is just linking back to IDEA for your reference, just some good summary information about that. And then the second link is an article that just kind of talks about the IDEA funding formula and how it has resulted in inequities as IDEA has been in place for as many years as it has now. And Minnesota is one of the sort of losers, I would say, in the funding. When you compare states, we are definitely the lowest in the Midwest states, but also just across the country, definitely lower than many. So we would love to see the formula changed, and you can just get some more information about that too with that link. Next slide. Thank you. So while we were in Washington, D.C., we had the opportunity to meet with 10 different members of Congress. You can see them listed here. In some cases, we met with the congressman or woman. In other cases, we met with their legislative aides. In all cases, we were really optimistic. We felt really good about strong support for education that we have from our Minnesota members of Congress nationally. And so just overall, I think we felt like their time was absolutely worth it, that they were very interested in our stories. They will use those stories when they visit with their peers about these bills and about this legislation that needs to, continue to support education. And so overall, we were really pleased to have the opportunity to meet with all 10 members of Congress from Minnesota, and just very, very pleased and optimistic about the reception of those meetings. If you want to go to the next slide. So just a couple more pictures of some of the congressmen we did meet with. You can see here the teams pictured with Representative Pete Stauber and Representative Brad Finstead. But again, just really feeling great about those connections that we made. They remember us. They remember, the stories that we bring. They, I think, were, thought the bobber idea was kind of cute this year too. But I mean, really, it goes beyond, us just sitting down and talking about any particular issue. It was, talking about our issues, our specific stories, what that looked like for students in our districts, and both representatives and senators really wanted to hear that. They wanted to know, how do these laws and policies and whatnot impact the constituents in Minnesota. And so we just felt like those connections are so valuable, and MASE having that consistent voice in the advocacy is so important. So next slide. Some just key takeaways from our visits. I already touched on a couple, but really just that Minnesota overall has a lot of support from our U.S. congressmen in comparison to some other districts, some other states. And Minnesota definitely stands out in that regard. We felt that they valued our visits. They really wanted to hear about our, stories and the issues that we're experiencing in Minnesota, and overall just felt like they were willing ears and very active participants in the conversation. I did put a couple bullets also just to think about, like, if you were ever interested in going, I would encourage you to go to CELS. Why? Because it's really important work, and if not us, then who? We are the voices that they want to hear from. We know the most about education, obviously teachers and others as well, but we need education voices from practitioners, from people who are in the field to come and share our stories. And then definitely we notice there's clear alignment between the work that we do Minnesota legislatively and the topics and the things that we're talking about federally. So it just feels, again, like there's a lot of clear alignment, and that MASE has a voice. We should have a voice both at the state and federal level. So we're very proud of what we're doing, and we just want to continue to do these things and really encourage our membership to stay involved and active in the voice federally and statewide. Okay, next slide, Nicole. So just some next steps on the end of MASE from this trip. We just want to again encourage all of our MASE members, if you haven't already connected with the Case Action Center, take an opportunity to do that. It's just a click. You can sign up your information really fast, and then you get text alerts, and it's really easy for you to go on and message your members of Congress with just 1 or 2 clicks about really important issues in a really timely fashion. So if you haven't already engaged at that level, we encourage you to do that. You can still have your voice heard throughout the year. We will continue to follow up with our legislators, both in DC and here in Minnesota, and make sure that we are continuing to build those partnerships and connections and share our voices. And then we'll share the CELS resources that we received with our legislative committee chairs here in Minnesota, so that we can access and continue to benefit from the things that we learn at CELS here in Minnesota as well, in our advocacy in the state. And shout out, or just plug, I guess. So if you haven't considered it before, or maybe want to think about going next year, here are the dates for CELS in 2024. It's really a great experience. I felt absolutely empowered having gone for the first time this year. And I was asking myself, why have I never done this? I just, you don't know what you don't know. And I just want to share that this is such a powerful experience. You learn so much, and it really does feel like your time is well spent. So encourage you to think about that. And I think I might have, oh, that was it. So thank you.
Thanks, Melissa. Thank you everyone too for who spent your time this summer at CELS advocating on behalf of MASE in Minnesota. We're just like very grateful. Can't wait to hear more about it. Okay, so your legislative tri-chairs want to bring you some information about 4 key legislative changes and some implications for practice. Again, questions are welcome at any time as we kind of go through. So just help monitoring the chat should questions arise. But we wanted to talk with everyone about the increased age limit for students with disabilities from 21 to 22, training for paraprofessionals, as well as the highly qualified clarification that we got from MDE, safe and inclusive schools, and then third-party billing for social workers. So I'm going to tag team with my tri-chairs and we're going to walk you through these changes. So I'm going to hand it over to Jamie or Heidi. Which one's doing age 21 to 22?
That would be me. And
Thank
I'm
you.
gonna hope that the carpet cleaning noise isn't too loud coming from the hallway.
So
Okay.
good so far.
So the first update that we wanted to make sure is on everyone's radar, which I'm guessing it is that the legislative change to the age in which students age out of services. So that has been increased from 21 to 22. So this allows students to generate average daily membership until their 22nd birthday. Previously, that was provided through June 30th after they turned age 21. You can see the different funding amounts that were allocated in this legislative session towards this. And then if you go to the next slide, what we tried to do is bring some of the implications for practice to you. So here you'll see this could impact as we move ahead staffing and program space for many of you. If you are anticipating that students are going to stay longer, you might need to take a peek at that sooner rather than later, what those implications are. In addition, I know Erin shared this out with membership sometime this summer, but we had been in touch with Paul Farron at MDE regarding the fiscal side and what the implication was there. So you'll see noted here a summary of Paul's response, which really is that if your expenses for transition programming are related to overhead, administrative costs, facilities, or other things that are non-SPED eligible, those costs would have to be absorbed by the district as you will be generating less ADM and therefore less gen ed revenue. If we're talking about special ed allowable expenditures where we get reimbursement on those, the funding won't be affected. So there's kind of 2 things that play there, but just wanting to make sure that's on everyone's radar.
Any questions about this one? So I see your question, Erin, and there has been confusion. Like, are they done at age 22 or through that year that they're 22? And that's their 22nd birthday that makes them no longer eligible, similar to students, aging out of DD at age 7. It's that birthday that's the important date here, and then they will be done. So you might have students exiting, which is also likely a change in programming for your transition programs, that students would be done mid-year versus at the end of a year more frequently. Great question. Any other questions about that increase in age? Okay. So the next change that we wanted to highlight is the training for paraprofessionals and highly qualified requirements. So just to hit the highlights here in terms of training, the new legislation requires a minimum of 8 hours of annual paid professional development for paraprofessionals. And those 8, 6 of those hours must be prior to the first instructional day, or for paraprofessionals hired later in the school year within 30 days of hiring. Previously, it was 60. So that's a tighter timeline for us to get in those 6 hours of training. And the training that they're getting has to be relevant to their employment. One piece of clarification we also got here is that those legally required annual HR trainings would count as part of this. So like bloodborne pathogens and mandated reporting. So those can be included in that 6 hours, but that 6 hours needs to be before the first day of school for students. And there's an annual certification reporting requirement to the commissioner. And then starting in FY25, districts will be reimbursed equal to their prior year compensation expenses. So that reimbursement for this is delayed. So you're not getting any upfront funding for this change, but it will be coming later. And then in terms of the highly qualified requirements, paraprofessionals must be highly qualified to be eligible for reimbursement. And this has gone back and forth, and there's been different interpretations that many leaders have received from MDE around special ed paras versus Title I paras, et cetera. But we got some ultimate clarification from MDE recently this summer that was communicated out by Aaron about this piece. And so if you have what it means to be highly qualified is either obtaining the voluntary lifetime credential through PELSB, which some do, but I don't believe many. And I think what most of us are doing is that second bullet, which is passing an approved paraprofessional exam. And so districts have varied practices around this across the state. Minnesota has 2 approved exams, so it has to be one of these 2 approved exams that is listed on the slide. Either the Parapro from Educational Testing Service or the Paraeducator Online Assessment from Master Teacher Inc. Again, districts cannot obtain reimbursement for paraprofessionals who are not highly qualified. If they're not highly qualified, according to Paul Farron, we have to code their time under Object Code 141, which is support non-highly qualified. And we're going to have to adopt systems to determine who is and who isn't highly qualified and create a pathway toward obtaining that qualified status for those paraprofessionals who don't currently meet those requirements. This isn't in the slide, but I think one of the biggest implications for districts with the legislative change around para training is, that came late in the year. We are likely some districts already have their plans for paraprofessional training. It might not meet that requirement for the 6 hours before the start of the school year. So pulling together leadership teams to do some planning and problem solving on how to get those paras that required training. Corey, I see your question about a grace period for people who are taking the test multiple times in order to pass. I haven't seen anything about a grace period, but I'll pause if anyone else has information on that. Going once for grace period. Twice for grace period.
So this reimbursement for highly qualified, that is in effect for FY23.
That is my understanding.
Okay.
Again, open to alternate interpretations of that.
That's what I thought too, Nicole.
Yeah.
That's my understanding as well. And Paul would say that's always been the requirement.
So again, more time coming up on August 8th, where we can be sharing some ideas and what this looks like and how people are providing this opportunity for paraprofessionals. But this is where we're at right now. Okay. Anything else about paraprofessionals before we move to safe and inclusive schools? Okay, go ahead, Jamie.
I think everyone is either just trying to stomach the legislative changes or you're still in summer mode.
Yeah. Maybe a
So
combination of both.
maybe a combination. So the next topic is safe and inclusive schools. Specifically, what we're highlighting here are some of the changes regarding discipline and restrictive procedures. There's a lot to unpack in this legislative and change in safe and inclusive schools. So just know we're not covering everything comprehensively. But key highlights here, there is included in the legislation a prohibition on K through 3 dismissals unless non-exclusionary discipline, otherwise known as NED, it's a fun new acronym for us, has been exhausted and there is an ongoing safety threat. One of the things noted in a lot of the different legislative updates that I've seen regarding this is that the statute does not prohibit sending a child home for less than a day. So just something to keep in mind. So basically what non-exclusionary discipline or NED is it's an alternative to dismissal from school. And what the legislative change requires is that we would do this before beginning dismissal proceedings or pupil withdrawal agreements, except where there is an immediate or substantial threat to person or property. This is in effect starting this school year, so there is no grace period with regard to this change. When we think about implications for practice, there are some specific implications that are called out in the legislation. So what needs to be communicated to parents? We, in our written notice of intent to exclude or expel, we have to describe the non-exclusionary discipline that was used. So you might want to think about what this looks like on your paperwork that you're using with parents. MDE is supposed to be posting a legal assistance resource list to include for families. In addition, readmission plans must include measures that would improve behavior or require reasonable attempts to obtain parental involvement in the readmission. So just know those are pieces that are outlined as steps we have to take as well with regard to our parent communication. There are also some reporting requirements to MDE. So we need to be reporting what non-exclusionary discipline practices were used anytime there's an assault. So obviously MDE has some catching up to do on their end in terms of how we're going to be reporting these things. I haven't seen anything come through specific to that, but if anyone has, we can pause and let you share that with the group here in a minute. And then we also need to pay attention to the legislation in terms of how it defines pupil withdrawal agreements, because we are also required to report those to MDE. Other implications for practice in terms of policy or just how we operate. We need to consider establishing NED policies and practices with minimum requirements for exclusion, expulsion, readmission, and access to resources. So that's listed in the legislation. We need to look at revising a policy to include procedures for students, parents, staff to file a complaint if they believe that the Pupil Fair Dismissal Act hasn't been upheld. And then you would also be advised to make updates to district discipline policy to reflect any other changes in this bill. And this isn't really new in our world, but the legislation also makes it clear that alternative educational services have to be provided if a student's suspended for more than 5 consecutive school days. And then one of the hot topics for elementary principals in particular has been around recess or lunch detention. So the legislation limits the use of recess detention and requires parent notification within 24 hours. We are also required to keep data on recess detention usage. It also prohibits us from withholding or excessively delaying participation in a meal time. So like you can't withhold breakfast or lunch or send them late, excessively late to those things. In terms of restrictive procedures, the legislation prohibits a district employee or agent from using prone restraint. For most of us, we've been saying that's not allowed for a while, but the agent piece is something to be aware of as we think of school resource officers. And then for purposes of maltreatment proceedings, prone restraints are not per se corporal punishment is what it says in the legislation. So with those specific pieces of safe and inclusive schools, you will want to spend some time with your administrators, likely making sure they're aware of your school principals in particular, when they can limit recess and lunch, and use that as a consequence, and when they can't. Also covering the prone restraint law, specifically in your trainings with regard to restrictive procedures, and probably connecting with your SROs was on my list. And then looking at the piece of the legislation where it says you're encouraged to support staff in using tiered interventions and consider adopting policies that promote constructive staff responses to student behavior. So that's not a mandatory, it's an encouraged to, but I think a lot of us are working on that anyways.
Thanks, Nord. There's a question here just regarding districts and how they're treating a partial day of removal for students with special needs. Are they counting it as a suspension, full day or part day, or not at all? I have heard all types of versions. Seem to get different advice from legal reps versus MDE. Maybe a topic for another day, but I think it could be fun. This is a participation opportunity. So if you could put in the chat how you typically, are in your system treating a partial day removal for a student with a disability. Are you counting it as a full day, part day, or not at all? So you just have to type full day, part day, or not at all, and then we'll kind of get a sense. A lot of full day. I think it would be good to come back to a slice topic around the complex topic of discipline for students with disabilities. But it looks like right now the vast majority of people are saying that they're treating it as a full day for students with disabilities. So, but great topic to come back to. I know I'm constantly digging into legal resources around this topic. It's perhaps one of the most complex and potentially litigious that we deal with. So good one to unpack a little bit more. Great question. You're welcome, Dustin. Happy to help. Okay. Continue.
The last piece I just wanted to make sure was on your radar. There's 3 topics here that you probably want to spend some more time unpacking back in your districts, but the legislation requires that school boards adopt a policy prohibiting malicious and sadistic conduct and sexual exploitation by staff and contractors, or students against staff and contractors or students. So this is a board policy thing, and I know some of you are in roles where you need to be staying up to make sure you have all of the mandatory policies in place, so I put that on here. In addition, there was some changes to active shooter drills and what we can and can't do and what that needs to look like. So something to dig into as you prepare to do those this school year. And then if you are in a district that issues student IDs, you need to be making sure you're including suicide prevention and crisis contact information on the cards. We've been working on that here in my district, and the photography company that we work with has been great about allowing us to print that on the back side of the ID card. So just wanting to make sure that one was on everyone's radar as well.
All right. Oh, go ahead. You good, Heidi?
I am good. I'm good. I wasn't sure if the go ahead was for Jamie, but no, here it is. So I have our last update, which is third-party billing for social workers. As many of you may know, in the last legislative session, we were able to get a bill passed that would allow our school social workers to bill MA for behavioral health services provided to students, which is really exciting, but we're not actually able to do it yet. We're getting closer, but we are not there yet. So this law is going into effect on January 1st of 2024, or upon federal approval. So right now where the process is at is DHS has to submit an amendment to the federal level to change our medical assistance plan. And so there's a group of stakeholders that are getting together later this week to kind of brainstorm how we're going to continue to advocate to DHS that this get done quickly. And that it continue to be a high priority. And then, so there's a stakeholder pre-meeting later this week, and then we are looking to meet with DHS, inviting MDE and other stakeholders, so that we're really kind of holding DHS accountable to be making sure that this happens. And so then the next slide. So we're currently waiting for DHS to either modify the policy or submit this state plan amendment to the federal level. And until that is done, districts cannot submit for social worker services to MA. Eventually, districts will be able to, but I think we have the collective concern that this is not something DHS has generally supported in the past, and still we feel like there's some hesitancy in strongly advocating for these changes to go into effect. So I'd say where we're kind of going next. Oh wait, no. And so what I will say too is, so I think this was my last slide. Is just like hold tight. There's a lot of people who are working to get this change, and will continue to push DHS to make these changes. And given the millions of dollars in revenue that districts could receive, there are several districts who have their own legal counsel who are actively monitoring this to help hold DHS accountable to be submitting these amendments, because I mean, this could bring in millions of dollars to the state of Minnesota. So we'll be continuing to push to get this to happen.
Awesome. Any questions about third-party billing?
Can I put in chat, your new president-elect, Amy Ernst, has shared, it's so hard to keep up on everything. So I think this is why we need everyone to talk about these things. Regarding student discipline, I'm going to put what MDE's message said specific to students with disabilities. There was a message on June 21st that said that the provision does not apply to a dismissal for school for less than one school day, except as provided under Chapter 125A and federal law for a student receiving special education services. So just, there might be some nuance there that we all need to dig into a little bit more. So I just thought I'd throw it in the chat. So hang on one second.
As
Coming
she's
your way.
doing that, just again, wanted to kind of circle back to where we're going from here. We're going to continue unpacking these implications and want to provide space for small groups to share ideas and just network around what they're doing. And our plan is to put 4 different breakouts together, one about discipline, one about transition, paraprofessional training, and then third-party billing. And obviously some of them don't require action quite yet, like third-party billing, but just to get people thinking and talking. And we're going to provide some note catchers that then will be shared across breakout groups, so that if you weren't in a particular group, you can still see some of those ideas, and we can kind of generate a list and some resources that we could be modeling in our own systems if we feel like we have gaps. So that's coming up on the 8th. And then stay tuned for additional guidance and communication from MDE following CAP approval. Again, that's still pending. So we're anticipating more information will come out once that CAP is approved, or if changes are needed before it's approved. We just need to follow that process and stay tuned. And then continue advocating in the various ways that you can for legislative change to support our system. We did a lot of work last year, a lot of work that we should be proud of. A lot of the changes that are made are in alignment to some of the things we were advocating for in our platform, and just not some of which we didn't cover here today, like student support personnel aid, providing us more opportunity to improve mental health supports for students in our system, et cetera. So we have a lot to be proud of and a lot yet to be done. So here we go. We're going to get started in a new year. And then before we break, just wanted to create one more opportunity for any questions, or if there are any requests for information maybe you were hoping to get today that you didn't, or things that are kind of top of mind for you legislatively speaking, feel free to put that in the chat too. It gives us a little opportunity to dig in and prepare in alignment to the needs of our members before August 8th.
I have a quick question. Heidi, this is a question for you. Thinking about what you know about the update to third-party billing for school social work. And there's some feet dragging happening. I understand that the federal approval has to happen before. So even if January 1st comes and that hasn't happened, we can't start yet. But are you feeling at a point that you are going to inform your school social workers and at least kind of get them trained up on the process and what they would need to do so that once that happens, it can roll out fast? Or do you really, honestly, do you feel like it's going to maybe be another year before that happens?
I don't have a great idea of what the timeline's going to be, but I'm going to err on the side of starting to train my social workers on what this means and what documentation is going to entail. Just because if we get a mid-year start, it's going to be really hard for me to pull my social workers together and get them to change practice in the middle of the year with something that they've known nothing about. The social workers, advocacy organizations, they've been wanting this for years. And so a lot of our social workers will know that this is coming. And so just to start learning the technical pieces of whichever system you use for your MA billing, whether that's SPED forms or something different, I'm going to start providing some training probably before school starts, just because that's when I'm able to pull people together.
Good question, Corey. Anything else from the audience? Okay. Well, happy Tuesday, MASE. Always good to be in your space. And
Thank you, Nicole and
Yeah.
Jamie and Heidi and Melissa. We really appreciate you sharing the information. I will stick around a little bit if there's other ideas for that August 8th, just in the chat. And I'll write those down because we can have more than just the 4 breakout sessions too. If you
Yep.
have another one of those topics that is something that you're interested in, just put it in chat. We'll write it down. Thank you.
Thank you. Stop.